On Tuesday, she laid her father to rest. On Wednesday, her husband served her with divorce papers, and by Friday, he was already remarried. She remembers him at the graveside, standing just out of reach, completely dry beneath his umbrella as a cold, hard rain drenched her completely. What he did not know was that the quiet janitor who raised her was secretly a billionaire. And when he proudly escorted his new bride to a lavish high society ball, he was marching straight into a trap that would strip him of everything he had. Have you ever felt invisible, only to be completely misjudged by those around you? This tale explores if old-fashioned values like loyalty and patience still hold any power. The events that follow are going to make you rethink how you see other people. It is a powerful reminder that real value is measured by how you act when you think no one can see you. And in a strange twist, the very individuals who dismiss you can accidentally hand you the key to your own success. For her father, the only sound of breathing came from the constant pulse of the machines. Maya gently put her hand on the cool, metal frame of his hospital bed. Her knuckles were white from gripping the railing, her entire focus on the room's electronic pulse. A ventilator sighed, forcing each breath into his lungs. The heart monitor kept a steady, tireless beat. Above her, the lights gave off a low, emotionless buzz. She watched his chest rise and fall, but knew it was the machine, breathing for him. "Daddy," she whispered, leaning so close she could smell the sharp, sterile air. "Please, just give me one more fight." His hand was warm inside hers, the skin rough from a lifetime of work. It was a hand that still felt strong enough to hold on, but it no longer had the strength to awaken. The doctors used quiet, gentle words, like fading and unresponsive, but their soft voices could not hide the harsh reality she was confronting. Her father was slipping away, and nothing could prevent it. For 2 full days, she stayed by his side. She did not sleep. She barely ate. She survived on bitter, old coffee that tasted of sorrow and the constant pain in her back from the stiff hospital chair. Her husband, Marcus, had only texted her twice. The first text asked if she wanted him to drop anything off. The second told her he would not be home in time for their meal. She did not reply to either one. Outside the hospital, the city hummed with activity. Cars honked and people's laughter filled the air. Life was continuing as normal, completely unaware that her own world was falling apart. But inside that sterile room, time had slowed to a crawl. The air itself felt heavy, pressing down on her, as if testing her breaking point. Her father had been her only parent. He never requested help and never uttered a complaint. He simply gave her a steady, silent love she knew was always there. At age 7, he patiently showed her how to tie her shoelaces. When she was 12, he taught her the steps to change a car tire. At 16, he told her that the loudest person in the room is often the one with the least to contribute. And when she was 23 and announced she was getting married, he did not offer a simple blessing. He just studied Marcus during dinner, asking questions that seemed to cut right through the surface. After Marcus left, her father held her and said, "I trust you to know what is right for your own heart." He never once said he trusted Marcus. He only said he trusted her. She had not understood the weight of his words at the time, but their meaning was crashing down on her now. A nurse entered the room, moving with quiet efficiency as she checked the machines and tweaked the settings. The nurse avoided looking at Maya, a familiar courtesy for someone who had seen this tragedy unfold too many times. Maya felt her phone buzz but ignored it. Suddenly she saw movement. Her father's fingers twitched, a tiny, faint motion. Her breath caught in her chest and she shot up in her chair. "Dad?" His mouth opened, but no sound came out. She pressed her ear close to his lips, praying for even a single syllable. With great effort, he forced out 2 words. "Go, bank." Immediately, a loud alarm sounded from the monitors. A team of nurses rushed in, kindly but decisively leading a shocked Maya into the hallway. She could only stand there, waiting for the official word that confirmed what she already felt deep inside. Her father had passed away, and his last two words made no sense to her at all. As a child, Maya thought it was normal for fathers to have two jobs, since that is all she ever knew. She recalled him coming home long after dark, his face lined with tiredness, but he always found the energy for a smile that was reserved only for her. She thought all fathers knew how to fix a leaky pipe or tell the most amazing stories before bed. At least, hers did. By day, he worked as a janitor in the town school. On 3 evenings each week, he cleaned and maintained the local church. He spent his weekends doing small repairs for neighbors who had little money. They gave him home-cooked food, heartfelt thanks, and their honest respect. He was never angry or resentful. He just put in the hours, made them supper, and paid close attention to everything she said, as if her daily updates were the most important headlines of the day. They lived in a tiny apartment with only one bedroom, which he insisted she take. For 16 years, his own bed was the couch in the living room, and he never made her feel guilty about it. They owned very little, but everything they had was kept spotless and in perfect condition. He would fold his plain work shirts with the care some men give to their finest clothes. He polished his work boots every Sunday night, without exception. The kitchen calendar was covered in her school events, with each one circled in bright red ink. He never missed a single one. Other children's parents showed up in suits and nice dresses, looking at expensive watches and getting out of fancy vehicles. Her dad would arrive in his work uniform, smelling faintly of soap and polish. He would always find a chair in the very back, hoping nobody would notice him. But she was never embarrassed by him, not for a moment. Because when other parents were looking down at their phones, her father's eyes were fixed on her, as though she were the only person performing. He also taught her things a janitor was not supposed to know. He instructed her on how to read legal documents and spot the hidden traps in the small text. He showed her that a person's hands often reveal a lie when their face does not. He taught her to walk into any room and figure out who held the real power versus who was just making a scene. "Cash makes a lot of noise, honey," he would say while they washed the dinner plates. "But a person's integrity is quiet, and the only people you should give your attention to are the ones who know how to hear that quiet sound." His teachings did not make complete sense to her then, but she never forgot them. The day her acceptance letter from college came, he cried openly. It was not from sorrow, but from a deep pride that made his whole face shine. "You are going to do things that I was never able to," he said, his voice heavy with feeling. "But you gave me everything," she argued. He just smiled and shook his head. "No, I simply made a different choice, and that is not the same thing at all." She did not think to question what that choice was. She replayed it all in her mind, finally understanding the truth about her father. He was never just a simple janitor. His perfect speech, the difficult books on his shelf, the way the bank tellers all greeted him like an old friend, it all made sense now. He had a secret life for a very good reason, and she was just beginning to grasp the scale of it. The memory of his funeral was still so sharp. The sky was not just crying that day, it was furious. A cold, bitter rain hammered down, soaking completely through her thin coat. The ground turned into a thick, messy slush around her feet. It truly felt like the heavens were angry on her behalf. Maya was 6 months pregnant, standing right at the edge of the grave. Marcus stood next to her, keeping himself dry under his own umbrella. It was the smallness of that detail that struck her. She was not expecting a big display of affection. But when a sudden blast of wind sent rain stinging her cheeks, he did nothing. He never moved to protect her. He just stayed dry, completely absorbed in his phone. One by one, people came up to give a hug or whisper some well-meaning words of support, but their phrases felt hollow. He's gone to a better place. His struggle is finally done. There's one more angel in heaven now. She would just nod her head and to murmur a soft thank you, allowing them to think they had helped. But her mind was shouting, "He is not in a better place. He belongs right here with me. He was meant to see this child born, to hold his grandchild, to keep on living." Marcus checked his watch 2 separate times during the ceremony. When the minister invited people to say a few words, Marcus stayed quiet. Maya talked about her father's hands and how they were always busy, always repairing, always building, and always ready to catch her when she stumbled. Her words stuck in her throat, and she had to stop for a moment to compose herself. Marcus made no move to comfort her or put his arm on her shoulder. As the casket was being lowered, she stepped toward the edge of the grave to lay a single rose on the lid. Her heels immediately plunged into the wet earth. She nearly fell, but an elderly lady from the church reached out and grabbed her arm. The woman held her up and said quietly, "I have got you, honey." Marcus appeared not to notice. Afterward, the guests all met at the church for a simple gathering. Food sat untouched on trays, and the coffee in every cup had long gone cold. The room buzzed with conversations that felt strangely upbeat for a funeral. Maya, feeling utterly exhausted, escaped to a quiet corner and rested a hand on her pregnant belly. Her baby was kicking hard, almost as if it could feel her distress. It took her husband, Marcus, a whole 20 minutes to finally walk over. He did not ask how she was. Instead, he just announced, "I need to step out for a bit." Maya looked up, confused. "You mean right now?" she asked. His only reply was, "Yes." She tried to remember if he had mentioned a work thing, but her mind was a blank. Had he said anything at all? Grief can make you forget things, so she let it go. "Okay," she whispered. He gave her a quick, empty kiss on the forehead that felt like nothing. He promised he would be back later that night, but he never showed up. By 10 o'clock, she was sitting by herself in their apartment, still in her black funeral dress, just looking at her phone. There were no messages. There were no missed calls. There was just silence from him. The quiet in the apartment felt heavy, and a chill started to creep into her heart. She had just buried her father, the one person who always had her back. And in that same moment, she understood that her husband had left their marriage a long, long time ago. She just had not been willing to admit it to herself. The proof did not come from a fight or a suspicious phone call. It came from Instagram. Around midnight, she finally forced herself to stand up and change out of the clothes she had worn all day. She washed her face, trying to rinse away the sorrow, and climbed into bed. Her body hurt from grieving, but her mind would not shut off. She picked up her phone, just out of habit, and started scrolling. She just wanted something, anything, to take her mind off the two awful facts of her life. Her dad was gone, and her husband was missing. That is when she saw it, a picture of Marcus. He was at a restaurant she recognized, a pricey, romantic spot known for its candlelight, and he was with another woman. This was clearly not a work dinner. The woman was young and stylish, the kind of beautiful that costs a lot of money. She was leaning forward, laughing at something Marcus had said. He was leaning back, looking completely at ease, with a smile Maya had not seen in months. The caption on the photo was just 2 words, "New Beginnings," with an emoji of clinking champagne glasses. It had been posted only an hour ago. Maya stared at the screen so long that the picture went blurry. The tears did not come right away. She just sat there, frozen, phone in hand. Her heart started to hammer in her chest. It had been less than 12 hours since she buried her father, and her husband was out toasting a new life. She clicked on the woman's name, Isabel Chun. Her profile listed her as a marketing director with 73,000 followers. Every single picture was perfect, like a page from a magazine, showing off a life that felt completely unreal to Maya. Then she checked Marcus's online history. She found a trail of likes on Isabel's photos stretching back for 3 whole months, along with comments that were far too familiar. The pattern was so obvious now. She realized she had either been too naive or simply too tired to notice. Her hands started to shake, but this time it was not from sadness. It was anger, hot and sharp. It was like her body finally understood the betrayal her heart had been ignoring. She got out of bed, walked to the bathroom, and held onto the sink. She looked at herself in the mirror, pregnant, exhausted, and abandoned. Her husband could not even show enough respect to wait a single day after her father's funeral. She did not throw anything or let out a scream. She did not even pick up the phone to confront him. Instead, she just stood there, taking slow, deep breaths, feeling her baby kick. A moment later, she went back to her bed, set the phone down, and chose to wait. Marcus got home at 2:14 in the morning. She heard the click of the front door, the clink of his keys on the counter, and his footsteps down the hall. He did not even look in on her. He went right to the guest room, and with that, Maya knew for sure that her marriage was finished. But she had no idea that things were about to get so much worse. He waited until the morning to have the conversation, not out of kindness, but because he was a coward who needed the daylight to do his dirty deeds. Maya was in the kitchen, staring into a cup of coffee she was not going to drink, when Marcus walked in. He looked fresh and rested, already showered and dressed, like he was preparing for a big presentation. "We need to talk," he said, his voice flat. She remained silent, just watching him, because she already knew what was coming. He sat across the table from her, folding his hands as if this were a business negotiation. "I think it is time we admitted this is not working," he started. Maya's stomach clenched, but her face showed nothing. "I have not been happy, and I do not think you have been either. We just have not talked about it." She almost laughed out loud at his use of the word we, as if this was a joint decision, as if she had any part in this. "I want a divorce," he said. The words hung in the air, cold and sharp, with no emotion behind them. The baby kicked inside her, a sudden hard jolt, as if it sensed the danger. "You really mean this?" she said, her voice just above a whisper. "I do," he confirmed. "My father's funeral was yesterday." "I know, and I am sorry for your loss," he said. "But that does not change anything between us." Between us, she thought, as if their marriage was just some inconvenient circumstance. "I will take care of the baby, of course," he continued, sounding like an attorney. "Financially, I will meet my obligations, but you and I are over. I have met someone else," he finally admitted. And there it was. In that instant, she saw him clearly for the first time. This was the man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, the man who made sacred vows to her. And here he was, calmly dismantling her world piece by piece. "I have already contacted my lawyer," he added. "The divorce papers should be ready in a few days. All you need to do is sign them." "Just sign them," she echoed, her voice completely empty. "I am trying to make this as easy on you as I can." Easy. The word made her blood boil. She wanted to scream, to hurl her mug at his calm face, to demand an answer for how he could be so cruel. But she stopped herself. Her father's voice echoed in her head, advice he had given her countless times. "When people show you who they really are," he used to say, "believe them." Marcus was showing his true colors, and she finally believed it. "Okay," she said quietly. He was visibly surprised. He had clearly expected tears and shouting. "Okay? Well, good. Okay then." He pushed his chair back, a wave of relief washing over his face. "This is for the best, you will see." She did not respond. He turned and left the kitchen, then walked right out the front door, leaving her completely alone and 6 months pregnant. And in that quiet, empty apartment, she suddenly remembered her father's very last words to her. Go to the bank. She immediately grabbed her coat and headed for the door. Now, if you think this is just another sad story about a man leaving his wife at her lowest point, you need to stick around. Because what happens next will change the way you think about justice and sweet revenge. This was no ordinary bank. It felt more like a vault for ancient secrets than a place for cashing paychecks. Maya crossed the huge lobby, walking past giant marble pillars and fancy chandeliers that seemed completely out of place. The squeak of her shoes on the polished floor was the only sound she made. She felt completely underdressed, like she had stumbled into a world where she did not belong. Before she even reached the main counter, a woman in a perfectly tailored suit walked right up to her. "Miss Richardson?" she asked. Maya froze. "Yes? We have been waiting for you. Right this way, please." Maya had not called. She had not made an appointment, yet somehow they knew her name. The woman guided her away from the public area, through a locked security door and down a silent hallway. They stepped into a private room with no windows, where an older gentleman in his 60s, with kind eyes and silver hair, was already standing to welcome her. The man who greeted her at the door had a peaceful presence, the kind that came from having seen everything life has to offer. "Miss Richardson," he began in a calm voice, "I am Victor Kane. I managed your father's personal affairs for 32 years. My deepest condolences for your loss." Maya just nodded, a heavy feeling forming in her throat. "He told me I should come here, just before he passed," she managed to say, trailing off. Victor pointed toward a comfortable chair. "Yes, he told me you would be coming," he said. "He left very clear instructions for you." He then set a small, metal case on the desk between them. The numbers 1, 2, 4, and 7 were carved into the lid. "This case needs 2 different keys to be opened," Victor said. He took one key out of his suit jacket pocket. "The other key should be among his personal effects." Maya reached into her purse and took out the large manila envelope the hospital had given her. Tucked inside, with her father's wedding ring and his old watch, was a tiny brass key. It had seemed like nothing special just a few moments ago. She handed the key to Victor. He put both keys into the locks, turning them in perfect unison. A loud, solid click echoed in the quiet room. Victor opened the lid of the case and then took a respectful step away from the desk. He spoke gently. "I will leave you alone for a little while. Please, take as much time as you need." With those words, he exited the office, quietly shutting the door on his way out. Maya's eyes were fixed on what was inside. On the very top was a stack of papers held together by a black binder clip, next to a sealed envelope. Her own name was written on the front in her father's distinct handwriting. But there was something else underneath that made her gasp. It was a small pile of old photos. The top one showed her father, no older than 25, smiling proudly in front of a giant mansion. He wore a suit that probably cost more than her apartment, and he was with a group of people who looked like they ran the entire country. Her attention shifted to the next object, a faded yellow newspaper article that was still perfectly clear. The headline announced, "Hartwell heir vanishes after family dispute." She looked at the date, which was from 34 years ago. The name below the headline read James Hartwell III. She looked back at the photograph. It was her father, without a doubt, but she had never heard that name before. Her hands started to tremble as she reached for the documents. The very first page was a legal trust created 28 years ago. It had been updated just 3 weeks before her father's death. The sole beneficiary was listed as Maya Richardson. The trustee in charge was Victor Kane. She tried to read through the thick legal language, but understood almost none of it. She saw words like irrevocable and protected interest and something about a spousal exclusion. And then her eyes landed on a figure, written near the end of the page. She had to read it 2, then 3 more times. It was completely unbelievable. Her father, the man who had worked as a janitor for 35 years, had left her a sum of money that was simply impossible. This was not about inheriting a small house or a savings account. It was an astonishing fortune. With trembling fingers, she opened the sealed envelope. The letter was on simple, plain paper. There was no fancy stationery, only her father's perfect cursive, tilting slightly to the right the way it always did. The letter began, "My baby girl, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. I am so sorry that I could not be the one to tell you this in person. Some truths are just much simpler to understand when you have lived a little longer. I was not always known as James Richardson. I was born James Hartwell III. I was the only heir to a family that cared more about its image than it did about its own people. They believed in control more than they believed in character. My father built a corporate empire, and his father had built it up before him. My future was already decided for me, and I was never given a choice in the matter. Then, when I was 26 years old, I met your mother. She was a clerk at a small bookstore down the street from the college. She always kept her hair in a single, long braid. Often she used to read poetry on her lunch hour. She introduced a kind of joy into my life that I had never known. She was not impressed by my family's reputation, and she certainly did not care about their wealth. She cared about the person I was when no one else was around. I wanted to propose to her, but my family forbid it. Their issue was not that she was a bad person. The problem was that she was not a part of their grand design. They were obsessed with mergers and business alliances that would look good in the newspapers. So, they gave me a choice. I could have the family inheritance, or I could have the life that I really wanted. I chose her, and my family made sure that I would regret that decision. Maya had to pause for a second to wipe a tear from her cheek. They cut me off completely. They publicly disowned me and removed my name from every record, acting as though I never existed. I took a new name and found jobs that did not require a background check. I built a new life from scratch with the woman I loved. I learned that a good life has nothing to do with money. A good life is about having a sense of purpose. Your mother and I had 6 beautiful years together before she died, bringing you into the world. I want you to know, those 6 years were the wealthiest years of my entire existence. But there is one thing my family never learned. It has to do with an arrangement I made right before I left forever. I did not just walk away from the fortune. I completely rearranged it. I hid it behind so many layers of legal protection that their team of lawyers could never get near it. I put a person I trusted completely in charge of it all. Then I just lived a normal life and waited. My intention was never to get even with them. I did it because I had a feeling that you might need this resource one day. The fortune grew quietly, handled by smart people who know that real wealth is not about spending money. It is about having security. It is about having options. This money is your protection from the kind of people I ran away from. They are the sort of people who only value you when they think you can do something for them. I wanted you to grow up far away from that world. I needed you to find yourself. You needed to know your own worth as a human being before you knew about your net worth. I wanted you to fall in love for the right reasons and to build your character when you had nothing. Now that you know the whole story, there is one more thing to remember. This money is not who you are. It is the tool that lets you stay exactly who you are, without ever having to bend, without ever being afraid, and without ever needing to ask for anyone's permission. Maya set the letter down on the desk. Her father was not escaping his fortune. He was protecting her from it until she was ready. The rest of the papers explained everything perfectly. There was an irrevocable trust document, created 6 months after her father had changed his name. The trust's condition was checked every 5 years. The last change was made just 3 weeks before he died, right after his diagnosis. Maya read through the document with care, taking in every detail. This was not just cash in an account. It was a financial fortress, built with a brilliant long-term plan. Every single asset was owned by a different company. That design shielded them from legal action, divorce settlements, or any claims from bill collectors. Her name was not on any public record. No tax statements or property titles could lead back to her. Victor Kane, the gentleman who had brought her the case, was the appointed trustee. He had full power to manage and protect the assets, but he could not touch a single dollar of it without her signature, now that she was over the age of 25. She had turned 25 just 3 months ago. One particular part of the document made her stop and think. It was called the Spousal Exclusion Clause. She read it again, trying to understand the complicated wording. Then, it all made sense. If she ever got married, her husband could never touch any of the assets. The fortune was hers, and only hers, protected for the rest of her life. This was not meant to be a punishment. It was not a sign that her father would distrust her future husband. It was the ultimate shield he could give her. Her father had seen how messy divorces could ruin wealthy families. He had built a powerful, unbreakable wall around her. No one could get past that wall. Not a fortune hunter, not a smooth talker full of lies, and not even a decent man from a marriage that simply did not work out. A husband would have zero legal claim to any of it, not to the original amount, not to the interest it earned, not to any single part of it. The trust was designed from the ground up to be beyond the reach of anyone who might try to get to it through her. Her father had planned it that way on purpose. He did not know the men she would meet, but he knew that a man with a charming smile and a pocket full of empty promises would eventually come along. Her father knew a man like Marcus would disappear at the first sign of trouble. The trust he set up was meant to give her money anytime she needed it. But once that money was in her hands, it belonged to her and her alone. The law was clear. It was her private property. Marcus could not touch a single penny, not in a divorce, not ever. Her father had seen this coming. Maybe not this exact situation, but he understood the risk. He spent 3 decades making sure no one could harm her the way his own relatives had tried to harm him. And there were other protections written into the papers. It included rules to protect any children she might have in the future. It had backup plans in case she ever could not make decisions for herself. It even offered suggestions on how to use the money if she wanted them. A certain line was written over and over again in all the legal paperwork. The beneficiary has complete and total control. What that really meant was that everything was hers, to do with as she pleased. Nobody could tell her how to spend it, where to invest it, or who to give it to, and not a single person on earth ever needed to find out about it. Then her thoughts returned to Marcus. She thought about the divorce papers he said he was preparing. She remembered him acting like he was doing her some big favor. He was completely in the dark. He did not know the real story about her dad. He did not know about the fortune she now controlled. He could not possibly guess that the woman he was leaving behind was more powerful than he could ever dream of being. The question was not if she could get back at him. It was whether she even wanted to. Her father's voice seemed to whisper in her head, "Real strength is knowing you do not need to show it." But she was not so sure about that. Power did not have to be noisy and mean. It could be quiet and careful. So, that is what she would be. Careful. She looked at the letter one more time. 2 pages were still left. "Now that you know what you have," it began, "I need you to know something even bigger. Who you are. This money is not you. It can never be you. You are made of better stuff than that. You are made of honesty, of sacrifice, and of watching someone pick love over a huge pile of cash. I did not raise you with very little to punish you. I raised you to live a simple life. I did that on purpose to teach you a lesson. You learned how important it is to make your own money. You learned to be patient and to live with less. You make choices from your soul, not because they are easy. That is a lesson that most wealthy people never learn. They start to believe the money is them. They think it makes them strong, but it really just makes them loud. You are not like that. You get that real strength is not what you have in the bank. It is who you are when your pockets are empty. And now, my love, you have everything. Always hold on to this lesson, because you are about to see it play out in real life. The truth has a way of showing itself eventually. It may not be quick, but it will happen. And when it does, you will see people's true colors. The friends who stood by you when you had nothing will be the same ones celebrating with you when you succeed. The people who walked away will try to come back into your life, and the ones who thought little of you will suddenly ask for your forgiveness. Let them try. You do not owe them anything, and there is no better teacher than watching people show you who they really are. Some people might be angry that you kept this quiet. Just let them be angry. You do not ever have to explain your money or your private life to anybody. Other people will watch you, waiting for you to become arrogant or careless. Show them they are wrong just by being the same person you have always been. And then there will be the people who completely misunderstand you. They will mistake your quiet nature for weakness. They will think your kind heart means you are not intelligent. Because you do not show off your wealth, they will decide you do not have any. These are the ones you need to watch. Not because they can steal your money. You are safe from that now. They are a different kind of danger, because they will test who you are at your core. The way you handle them will decide the kind of woman you will be. So this is my real gift to you. Patience. It is being able to keep your cool when things get difficult, without getting angry. It is letting people think whatever they want about you while you build a life they cannot even dream of. It is staying quiet when everyone around you is making noise. Getting even is easy. Anybody with enough cash can destroy another person. But to have self-control, to hold back, and to decide not to use your power when it would be so easy is different. That is a truly special kind of strength. That is how you leave a real mark on the world. I love you, my sweet daughter. I always have, and I always will. You are going to be okay, and then some. Dad. Maya carefully folded the letter and put it back in its envelope. She did not cry. She did not feel a wave of fury. She did not grab her phone to call Marcus and tell him he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Instead, she just sat there quietly, with her hands on her stomach, feeling her baby girl move inside her. At that very second, she understood her father was right. Some battles are not worth fighting, because the people who should lose will find a way to fail all by themselves. 20 minutes later, Victor returned. He knocked gently on the door before entering, to give her a moment to prepare. "Do you have any questions for me?" he asked softly. "Just one," Maya said. "How much money is there?" He sat down in the chair opposite her. He handed her a single sheet of paper that had a simple summary on it. It was easy to understand, listing different company stocks. The list also included bonds, properties, shares in private companies, and funds in other countries. The money was invested in 12 different nations. The whole collection of assets had been put together carefully over 34 years. It was handled very cautiously, without any big risks or flashy purchases that would draw attention. At the end of the last business period, the total amount was $5.2 billion. The number just stayed there on the paper, a truth too enormous for her brain to fully accept. She looked at it, read it a second time, and found it impossible to connect that amount of money to the father who raised her in a small one-bedroom apartment. This was the same man who packed her lunch for school in used paper bags. "That cannot be real," she whispered. "That is a conservative number," Victor told her. "Your father did not like to gamble with his money. He always picked investments that grew slowly but surely. If he had been willing to take bigger chances, that amount could have been much, much higher." All of a sudden, the room started to spin. "What am I meant to do with all this?" Victor gave her a kind, sympathetic smile. "Whatever you want. That is the whole idea. You could live off the earnings and never spend the main part. You could donate all of it to charity tomorrow. You could even pretend it does not exist. It belongs to you, with no strings attached." "Does anybody else know about this?" "Just me, and now you. Your father was extremely secretive about his money." Her mind went back to Marcus. She imagined the divorce papers he was getting ready and his offer to chip in for the baby. He had made the offer as if he was being a great hero. He was clueless, and she had no plans to tell him the truth. "I want this to stay a secret between us," she said firmly. "Nobody else has to know." Victor nodded. "That is a very smart decision. When you feel ready, we can arrange for you to get to the funds. Until that time, nothing will change." She got up, shook his hand, and walked out of the bank just as she had come in, by herself, sad and unsure of the future. But something deep inside of her had changed. She had a secret that Marcus would never discover. The woman he had thrown away was not defeated. She was strong, and her father had taught her that patience was the ultimate strength. 3 weeks after that, pictures from the courthouse showed up online. Marcus and Isabel had gotten married in a quick public ceremony. They were smiling from ear to ear, like they had won the lottery. The comments section blew up right away. People wrote things like, "Wow, that was quick," and "Did not his wife's father just pass away?" And "Some people have no class at all." Maya saw the photos and felt a painful jab in her chest, but she did not write a single word back. She just went on with her life as usual. She went to her doctor's appointments, she set up the baby's room, and she read her father's letter over and over. She knew it by heart. Every time a person asked her how she was doing, Maya would give a small smile and say the same thing. "I am okay." And the incredible part was that it was true. The pain of his betrayal did not just disappear, but she now knew something Marcus would never understand. Real power does not need people watching. It just waits for the right moment to make a move. Let that sink in for a second. True strength is silent until it is time to be heard. Most people want to shout about their power as soon as they have it. But those who have really earned it know better. Marcus acted incredibly fast. Their divorce was official in only 43 days. He got married again just 12 days later. Maya put her name on every piece of paper without fighting back. She did not ask him for any money. She did not fight over the small number of things they owned together. She accepted only what the law said was hers, which was practically nothing. She let him believe he was handling their separation with maturity. He posted about it once on his social media page. The post was a carefully worded statement about moving on with grace and putting his own happiness first. The comments section filled up with a mix of support and outrage. People wrote things like, "Good for you, man." "Life is short." Others said, "You could not even wait 6 months? Her father just passed." This is why no one believes in marriage anymore. Then Isabel made a post of her own. It was a photo of her hand, showing off a brand new ring that was huge and sparkling. Her caption simply said, "When you know, you know." The internet erupted with opinions, and people did not hold back. Maya became a story that families discussed at the dinner table. She was the pregnant wife whose husband had just left her. She was the woman who refused to say a word or defend herself. Everyone was watching her, just waiting for the day she would finally break down. Her husband had walked out on her right after her father's funeral. The tale was sad, tragic, and it made her look completely helpless. She heard about the gossip from other people. Her friends would call her, not knowing what to say. People she barely knew sent her uncomfortable text messages. Total strangers online debated if Marcus was a monster or simply a man who was following his heart. She never once corrected the story. She never defended her actions, and she never bothered to explain that she was actually doing fine. In fact, she was doing much better than just fine. She simply kept her head down and was patient. Her father had taught her a valuable lesson that most people never learn. He said public opinion is as unpredictable as the weather, but your real character never changes. And in that moment, Marcus was broadcasting his real character for the whole world to see. Maya did not need to do a thing. By her 7th month of pregnancy, most of the online chatter had disappeared. People had found new scandals and fresher gossip to talk about. Maya spent her days putting together baby furniture, washing tiny clothes, and reading books about having a baby that were both scary and reassuring. Victor called her once a week to check in and make sure she had everything she needed. She always assured him that she was okay. But the reality of her situation was much more complicated. She was not concerned about her finances. Victor arranged a small monthly deposit into her account. The money covered her rent, food, and doctor's appointments without attracting any attention. What she was struggling with was her feelings. It was not about Marcus leaving, but about his absolute and complete silence. Her father was gone. Her husband was gone. The one person who might have understood her pain was someone she could never talk to. It was the version of her father from 30 years ago who had to make the same impossible decision. Then one Tuesday toward the end of September, a special piece of mail arrived for her. The envelope was a beautiful cream color and felt heavy and expensive. Her name was written on the front in a beautiful flowing handwriting, but there was no return address. She opened it with great care. Inside was an invitation. It read, "You are formally invited to the inaugural event for the Richardson Hartwell Foundation." She felt the air catch in her throat. She had to read the words a second time. Richardson Hartwell was her father's birth name, which meant it was her true name too. The event was scheduled for October 14th. It was a formal gathering at a private location. Only a select group of guests would be there. At the very bottom of the invitation, in smaller letters, it said, "Your presence is requested as the Foundation's principal honoree." None of this made any sense to her. Victor had never said a word about a foundation. Her father's letter had not mentioned one either. She pulled out her phone and called Victor's number. He answered on the second ring. "You got the invitation," he said. It was a statement, not a question. "What is this all about?" she asked him. "It is your father's last wish," he told her. "He planned it for 2 years before he got sick. After he passed, I started putting his plan into motion. Now, it is time." "Time for what?" she asked, confused. Victor paused for a second before he answered softly. "It is time for everyone to finally know who you really are." Her heart started to pound inside her chest. "I never said yes to any of this," she said, her voice getting louder. "You do not have to do anything that makes you uncomfortable," he promised. "But the event is happening, and all the invitations are in the mail." "Who did you invite?" She needed to know. He paused again. "Everyone who should be there," he replied. "And yes, that includes Marcus." Just 3 days after their conversation, the story went public. A very professional press release was sent to news stations and charities all over the state. It announced the launch of the Richardson Hartwell Foundation, which would begin with an endowment of $50 million. The money was meant to improve education, fund job training programs, and support households with single parents. The announcement also mentioned the foundation's first charity gala, which was scheduled for the following month. It explained that the organization was created to carry on the legacy of James Richardson, a man who had served his community quietly but powerfully for over 30 years. The news report included a photo of her father, but it was not the one people recognized. He was not wearing his usual janitor uniform. It was an old picture of him in a perfectly tailored suit, looking like he belonged on the board of a major corporation. This caused a lot of confusion for everyone who knew him. "Hey, isn't that the custodian from the elementary school?" people asked one another. "I never knew he had money." The other big question on everyone's mind was, where did all this money come from? The official statement offered no clues. It listed Victor Kane as the executive director and had a list of board members no one in town had ever heard of. It also referred to an anonymous, mysterious donor. This kind person's donation was the entire reason the foundation existed. The town was buzzing with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. After all, $50 million does not just fall from the sky. And James Richardson, the quiet man who mopped floors and fixed leaky faucets, did not fit the image of a wealthy philanthropist. It did not take long for the rumors to start spreading. Some people were convinced it was all an elaborate trick. Others believed a famous person or a politician was using her father's good name to their advantage. A few even whispered that Maya must have gotten a huge divorce settlement from Marcus. They assumed she was using the money to repair her public image. Not a single person guessed the truth, because the real story was far more incredible than any rumor they could imagine. Maya watched everything unfold from a distance. She stayed silent, never correcting the gossip or adding to the public debate. Victor handled every last detail. He spoke to the reporters, planned the gala, and hired all the staff. The only thing Maya needed to do was appear on the night of the event. But the guest list weighed heavily on her mind. Victor had sent it to her through a secure email. It contained 200 names, including sponsors, community leaders, town officials, and people her father knew from his work. And then, near the end of the list, she saw their names, Marcus Chun, and one guest. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. "Why is he on this list?" she asked Victor over the phone. "Your father wanted him there," Victor answered in a steady voice. "He what?" "He left behind very specific instructions, and that included the guest list. Marcus's name was on it." "That is impossible," she argued. "My father was gone before Marcus and I ever separated." "Your father was a very perceptive man," Victor said, choosing his words carefully. "He had a special ability to see how things were going to turn out." Maya had trouble processing what he was saying. Her father had somehow anticipated that this would happen. He might not have known the exact details, but he understood the direction things were heading. And he made sure Marcus would be there to see the truth come to light. This was not about getting even. It was about teaching a powerful lesson. "I don't know if I can look at him," Maya admitted, her voice trembling. "You don't have to do anything," Victor reassured her. "But if you choose not to go, you will always wonder what could have been." She remembered her father's letter and his advice to be patient and let people reveal their own character. "He is going to bring Isabel with him," she said in a whisper. "That is highly probable," Victor agreed, "and all the guests are going to be talking." "They are already talking," he reminded her gently. She took a deep, shaky breath. In that very same moment, she felt the baby kick, and she instinctively put a hand on her stomach. "Okay," she said with new determination. "I will be there." "Good," Victor replied, "because this night is not for him. It is for you. It is time for everyone to see the difference." The location for the gala was absolutely stunning. It was a historic mansion that had been flawlessly renovated into a modern event space. Giant chandeliers, like frozen waterfalls, hung from the towering ceilings. The polished hardwood floors gleamed like a dark lake, reflecting thousands of tiny lights from the chandeliers above. Every table was draped in a luxurious fabric that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I arrived a full 30 minutes early, meeting Victor at a quiet side door. He greeted me with a smile that reached his eyes. "You are an absolute vision," he said warmly. I had chosen the gown with great care. It was a deep emerald green with a high waist that draped gracefully over my growing baby bump. My hair was styled in a simple but elegant knot at the base of my neck. I wore almost no jewelry, except for one very important piece, a diamond necklace I had retrieved from a bank vault. To the untrained eye, it was a simple, classic design. I had no idea of its monetary value. I only knew that it once belonged to my grandmother. She was the woman my father's wealthy family had cast out, right along with my father. Wearing her necklace tonight felt like a quiet declaration of strength. "How are you holding up?" Victor asked in a soft voice. "I am absolutely terrified," I admitted without hesitation. "Good," he replied. "That means you know exactly what is at stake." At that moment, the first guests started to file in. I stood watching from a concealed room with a one-way mirror that overlooked the grand ballroom. I recognized so many faces, people from my father's church, his former colleagues, and neighbors who had known him for decades. Then, my heart stopped. I saw Marcus. He entered with Isabel on his arm. She was wearing a fiery red dress, the kind a woman chooses when she demands to be the center of attention. Marcus, however, looked completely lost. It was not the opulent setting that made him uneasy. It was the fact that he had no clue why he was invited. His eyes darted around the room, clearly searching for me. Of course, he could not see me through the specialized glass. Isabel steered him toward the bar, where they grabbed drinks and offered fake smiles to strangers. They were perfectly playing the part of a happy, powerful couple. I could hear my own pulse thumping in my ears. Victor materialized silently beside me. "You do not have to go in yet," he offered. "We can wait for the program to begin." "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I want to enter just like everyone else." "Are you certain about that?" he asked gently. I just nodded, remembering something my father told me long ago. Courage is not about feeling prepared. It is about taking the next step even when you feel anything but ready. I turned from the mirror, exited the small observation room, and walked down a long corridor. When I got to the main entrance of the ballroom, I paused for only a moment. I took a single, deep breath to steady myself, and then I walked through the doors. The room did not fall silent immediately, but the entire atmosphere changed. The low hum of conversation started to fade as people trailed off mid-sentence. One by one, every head in that room turned in my direction. It was not a showy entrance. The reason they stared was simple. I was very obviously pregnant, and I was standing there completely alone. I watched as understanding, then pure shock, registered on face after face. The reality of the situation dawned on everyone at the same time. Marcus finally laid eyes on me. His expression went from surprise to confusion, and then it twisted into what looked like raw fear. His new girlfriend, Isabel, leaned in to whisper something, but Marcus remained frozen. He could not tear his gaze away from me, but I never once looked in his direction. I moved with a calm purpose to a reserved table near the stage. Once I was seated, I folded my hands in my lap and focused on my breathing. A kindly woman with gentle eyes approached my table. "You must be Maya," she said softly. "Your father talked about you constantly." "I am so deeply sorry for your loss," the woman continued. "Thank you," I managed to whisper back. She offered me a comforting smile. "He would be so incredibly proud to see you here tonight." A lump formed in my throat, and all I could do was nod. Soon more people came to my table. They all shared their condolences and told me wonderful stories about my father. Across the room, Marcus sat rigid in his chair. A terrible thought began to creep into his mind. This was not just some random charity gala. This entire evening was for her, and he had a sinking feeling about what was coming next. In that instant, the lights throughout the ballroom began to dim. A lone spotlight illuminated a microphone at the center of the stage. A man named Victor stepped up to it. "Good evening, everyone," he began. "Thank you all for being here. Tonight, we are doing more than just launching a new foundation. We are gathering to celebrate a man who lived his principles, a man who always chose to do the right thing, even when no one was watching." Victor spoke of my father's integrity and his compassion. He painted a picture of someone you could always count on. All around the room, people nodded in agreement, and some dabbed at their eyes. Then Victor's voice grew serious. But there is a part of his life story that very few people know. James Richardson made an impossible choice. 34 years ago? He walked away from a future of unimaginable wealth and influence. He did it because he would not abandon the woman he loved. He changed his name, started over with absolutely nothing, and built a life based on his strong character, not a family inheritance. A confused murmur started to ripple through the crowd. Marcus was now leaning forward, hanging on every single word. "That single decision cost him everything his family valued," Victor continued. "But he received something far more precious in return. He gained his dignity, and he gained a daughter who inherited his values instead of his fortune." Victor paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the room. The Richardson Hartwell Foundation was created because James never forgot his roots. For 30 years, he quietly made arrangements. He wanted to make sure his daughter would one day have the resources to do good in the world, free from family politics or the strings of inherited privilege. Victor then turned and gestured directly toward me. "It is my distinct honor to introduce the founder and chief benefactor of this foundation, Miss Maya Richardson." The room erupted in applause. It began as polite clapping, but swelled into a roaring ovation as the truth sank in. I stood up and made my way to the stage. Every step I took toward that stage was measured and confident. I watched the expression on Marcus's face as he finally put all the pieces together. I saw his confusion melt into comprehension, and then into complete staggering disbelief. He was finally understanding it all. My father's true name was Richardson Hartwell. The $50 million endowment, the entire foundation, it was all mine. Isabel looked at him, puzzled by his strange reaction, but he offered no explanation. He just sat there, staring at the woman he had abandoned, the woman who was mourning her father and carrying his child. The woman he thought he had shattered was now commanding the attention of 200 people. They were all finally seeing the truth he had been too arrogant to see. She was never a charity case. She was an heiress. I reached the microphone and adjusted it to my height. The entire ballroom became perfectly still. I did not waste a single glance on Marcus. Instead, I looked out at the faces of the people who had genuinely cared for my father, the people who were here to honor his memory. Then, I began to speak. My voice was not loud, but it was unwavering and crystal clear. My father taught me that the most important decisions we make in our lives are the ones that happen when no one is looking. He taught me that real love is not about convenience. It is about showing up for people when things get hard, especially when nobody is watching, and especially when it is easier to just walk away. Several people in the audience nodded in agreement. He also taught me that wealth without morality is meaningless. He said that true strength is not found in what you possess. It is found in what you choose to do with what you have, when there is no one there to tell you what to do. I glanced down at my notes and took a slow breath. The man that most of you in this room knew was a janitor, a handyman who was always the first to arrive and the last to leave, and who never sought any praise. I looked back up at the crowd. But what you did not know is that he was born into one of the most affluent families on the East Coast. He was the sole heir to a massive corporation, but he gave it all up. He did it because that family, with all its money, told him the woman he loved was not good enough for them. Audible gasps and whispers filled the ballroom. He proved every last one of them wrong. My voice remained steady. He spent the next 34 years of his life. Lewis writes, proving that a good life is not measured by the number in your bank account. It is measured by the strength of your character. And when he passed away, he left me something much more valuable than money. I paused for effect. He left me with a choice. The room was so silent you could hear a pin drop. I could have kept this entire inheritance a secret. I could have taken the funds he left for me and simply vanished. No one would have ever known. No one would have cared. I looked directly out at the audience. But my father did not hide his wealth because he was ashamed of it. My father kept it a secret because he wanted me to understand my own character before I understood my own wealth. The weight of her words filled the room. Now that I understand both, I will carry on his work. I plan to create something that truly helps people. I want to lift up those who are usually ignored. I will be there for families going through hard times. At that moment, Victor returned to the stage. He set down a thick folder on the podium beside her. The Richardson Hartwell Foundation is now officially accepting applications, starting with a fund of $50 million. And we have a strong plan to make it grow for years to come. Our goal is to ensure this foundation provides lasting help for generations. A wave of applause started to spread, but Maya raised a hand to quiet them. She was not finished. That $50 million is less than 1% of the trust my father left for me. The clapping died instantly. People looked at one another, completely stunned, their minds racing to calculate the true amount. As of the last financial report, the total value is $5.2 billion. A profound silence swept through the ballroom. It was not just surprise, it was the sound of everyone's world shifting. Maya's expression remained neutral. She showed no pride, simply stating the number as a fact. I am not sharing this to show off. I am sharing this to make one thing absolutely clear. My father taught me responsibility, not wealth, and I intend to honor that lesson. She moved away from the podium. The applause that followed was thunderous. It was not just a polite clap, it was a roar of approval. The entire room rose to their feet, cheering, and many were moved to tears. Maya moved gracefully off the stage and returned to her table. On the other side of the room, Marcus was frozen solid. The blood had drained from his face. He gripped the table so tightly that his knuckles were bone white. Isabel was speaking to him, but her words were just noise. His thoughts were a whirlwind as he tried to grasp the enormous figure. The wife he had left, the woman he thought was penniless, now commanded a fortune beyond his wildest dreams. And he had thrown it all away, not because he thought she was not good enough, but because he had never taken the time to see the person she truly was. If you have ever underestimated someone for being modest or reserved, take this as a lesson. And if you believe that integrity and faithfulness still matter, then you will definitely want to hear the rest of this story. The moment Maya was seated, Marcus made a break for it. He shot up from his seat, pulled Isabel by the arm, and muttered an excuse about getting some air. But Victor was already there. He was not blocking the way out. He simply stood by the door with a calm and knowing look on his face. That peaceful smile communicated everything without a single word. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. Isabel glanced up at him, puzzled. "What is the matter?" she asked. He was speechless. How could he even begin to explain? How could he tell her that his ex-wife, divorced just 2 months ago, the woman he abandoned while she was pregnant and mourning her father, was now one of the wealthiest individuals in the entire state? That he had tossed aside a fortune because he lacked the basic decency to support her in her darkest hour? That every decision he made over the last 6 months was based on a colossal miscalculation of who held all the cards? Isabel tugged gently at his arm. "Marcus, please say something." He sank back into his chair, feeling utterly empty, All around them, the room buzzed with cheerful conversation. People were excitedly discussing the new foundation, praising Maya's incredible composure and marveling at her father's life. A person at a nearby table said, "Can you believe he gave up so much just for love? That is incredible." Someone else chimed in, "And to have a daughter with such strength and dignity, now that is something truly special." Marcus registered every word. Each compliment was like a dagger, twisting with the knowledge of his own failures. His eyes found Maya across the room. A group of well-wishers had gathered around her, offering congratulations, warm embraces, and their support. She seemed tired, but a powerful resolve radiated from her. She did not even glance his way. It was not out of anger. It was simply because he had become completely irrelevant to her. Understanding finally started to click for Isabel. "Hold on," she said, her words careful and slow. "Is that your former wife?" He managed a small stiff nod. "The one you told me was broke." He remained silent. She carefully withdrew her hand from his, her eyes fixed on his face. "Marcus, how much of this did you know?" "Nothing," he answered, his voice barely a whisper. "I was completely in the dark." "And you never thought to ask?" He met her gaze and watched her expression change. He could see the gears turning in her mind as she reconsidered everything about their relationship. She was not mad at him. She was calculating, questioning if she had bet her future on a man who was incapable of seeing the value right before his eyes. He recognized the look, and it struck him that this was exactly how he must have made Maya feel. The shame of being reevaluated and found wanting by someone you trusted was crushing. "I have to speak with her," he announced abruptly. "I would not do that," Isabel cautioned. "I must." "Marcus, let it go." But he was already up and walking toward Maya's table. Victor moved to intercept him, his manner courteous but firm. "I'm sorry. She is not taking visitors at the moment. Just 5 minutes is all I need." "I'm afraid that is not possible." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You cannot speak for her." "I do not have to," Victor replied evenly. "She made it clear she wanted you to get the message. There's nothing more to say." The finality of the statement hit him like a slammed door. It was absolute. It was the end. Marcus just stood there, completely helpless, as the woman he had so terribly underestimated chatted with people of genuine influence. He had hoped for an explanation, a chance to make things right, or at least the possibility of forgiveness. But Maya owed him none of those things, and she clearly had no intention of giving them. Roughly 10 minutes passed before she slipped out a side door without any fanfare. One moment she was there, and the next, she was gone. Marcus saw her go, and for the very first time in his whole life, he knew what it felt like to be utterly insignificant. Naomi Grace Richardson arrived on a Thursday. She weighed 7 pounds and 4 ounces, had a beautiful crop of dark hair, and gazed at the new world with her grandfather's eyes. Maya held her, for the very first time, in the stillness of her hospital room. No anxious husband was walking the corridors, and no relatives were filling the waiting area. There was only Victor, who had been adamant about being present, and a compassionate nurse named Petra. Petra chose to remain with them well past the end of her shift. She simply believed that no mother should have to greet her baby alone for the first time. "Oh, she is absolutely perfect," Petra said softly. Tears rolled down Maya's cheeks as she nodded. Her own father should have been in that room. He should have been cradling his new granddaughter, witnessing the beautiful result of all his hard work. The weight of the baby in her arms felt like a completed pledge, a bright future made possible by the man who could not be there to share it. Maya gazed at Naomi's face, a flawless little sign of a fresh start. "My precious girl," she murmured, "I will always keep you safe." She spoke the promise softly, but her father was gone and could not hear her. Maya understood that she now had to carry the strength for them both. She studied Naomi's face, gently tracing the lines on her little hands and committing each perfect detail to memory. She whispered to her newborn, "Your grandfather loved you more than anything, long before you arrived." She added, "He made sure your life would be protected, stable, and filled with endless possibilities." Naomi let out a tiny yawn. She was so very small, yet she was everything. Victor stepped nearer to the bed, his face full of grandfatherly affection, as he gazed at the baby. He said, "James would be bursting with pride right now." He added gently, "You have accomplished something amazing, Maya." She let out a long breath she had been holding. "I feel like I barely made it through," she confessed. He gave a warm smile. "Sometimes, that is the biggest victory of all." She stayed at the hospital for another 2 days, learning the rhythm of feedings, the basic skill of changing diapers, and the new reality of living on only a couple of hours of sleep. A flower arrangement arrived from Marcus. It was a standard bouquet from a grocery store, with a short, impersonal note that read, "Congratulations. Best wishes to you both." She tossed the whole thing into the garbage, without hesitating. It was not an act of rage. It was just a silent acknowledgement that the gesture was empty. The flowers were a meaningless token from someone who was now a stranger, by his own choice. At about the same time, Isabel posted a new picture online. She and Marcus were at a sunny brunch. Smiling widely for the camera, the caption said, "Choosing happiness every single day." Maya did not waste a moment looking at the comments. She was focused on what truly mattered. When she brought Naomi home for the first time, her apartment felt like a different place. The space felt cozier and calmer, and it was filled with a vibrant new presence, one that made everything feel complete. Maya moved the bassinet so it was right next to her bed. She hung up the mobile that her father bought, months before his health took a downward turn. During his long, sleepless nights, he had carved each of the small wooden animals by hand. She had found them in his apartment after he passed away. They were carefully wrapped with a small note attached that read, "For when she gets here." Now those same little animals spun in slow circles above his granddaughter. Their movement made soft, dancing shadows appear on the wall. Maya sank into the rocking chair and held Naomi in her arms. Then she started to sing. She sang a lullaby her father used to sing to her whenever she was a little girl and could not sleep. For the first time since he had passed, a feeling that felt like peace washed over her. The sadness was definitely still there, but she was starting to understand the lesson he had worked so hard to teach her. A legacy is not about the material possessions you leave behind for others. It is about the people you influence to carry on your values. The foundation began to grow at a speed that surprised everyone. In only 6 months, it had already provided scholarships for 40 students. It also opened a new center for career training. The foundation created partnerships with 3 separate local nonprofit groups. These organizations offered emergency help to single parents who were about to be evicted or were buried in medical debt. Maya managed everything while staying out of the public eye. There were no large press conferences or fancy ceremonies with ribbon cuttings. She only gave a speech when it was absolutely necessary. She would simply show up, make the critical decisions, sign the checks that changed lives, and then go back home to her daughter. People started to know her on the street, but not like she was some kind of celebrity. They saw her as a person who was making a genuine difference. One afternoon, a woman who looked to be in her late 30s walked up to her in a grocery store. Her eyes were filled with tears. "You paid for my son's college tuition," she said, and her voice trembled. "I do not know if you remember his name, but he is the first person in our whole family to ever go to college. It is all because of you." Maya gave her a warm smile. "It is because of your son," she replied. "He is the one who earned his place there." "No," the woman insisted, shaking her head. "It is because someone believed he was worth it." She finished by saying, "Thank you with all of my heart." Encounters just like that began happening more and more often. She got letters and emails, and she had chance meetings with people whose lives were completely transformed because the foundation was there to support them. Maya kept every single one of those letters. She would read them on the hard days, whenever she felt a hint of doubt about whether her work was really making an impact. It was making an impact. It was never about the money itself. It was about what that money could achieve for other people. Her father had been correct all along. Wealth without purpose is just empty noise. But wealth that is guided by a purpose is how you build something that will last. By the time Naomi celebrated her first birthday, the foundation was operating in 3 separate counties. Victor handled the daily operations, while Maya guided the overall vision. After some time, people stopped asking where the money came from. They were just thankful that it was always available when someone needed help. Marcus would hear about Maya's work every now and then. He heard it from people they both knew, saw it on social media, or her name would just come up in conversation in certain groups. It left him with a deep sense of unease. He even attempted to make a donation one time. He wrote a check for $5,000 and mailed it directly to the foundation's main office. Victor mailed it right back. There was no letter of explanation. The only things inside the envelope were his own check, still uncashed, and a slip of paper with one word written on it: denied. After that, Marcus did not try to donate again. Isabel finally left him, only 14 months after the gala. Her exit was not dramatic. It was just a simple fact. She had finally realized what Maya had known the entire time. Marcus was the kind of man who was constantly looking for a better offer. The moment he thought he had found something better, he would make the trade. He would also trade back down just as quickly when he saw his mistake. She had no desire to be the next person he completely misjudged. Their divorce was finalized quickly and with no trouble. It hardly made any news, because by that time, Marcus had turned into the very thing Maya knew he would be. He was no longer relevant. She had never set out to destroy him. She simply built a new life for herself that did not include him. In doing so, she made him a minor footnote in a story that was never really about him to begin with. Marcus saw Naomi just one other time, and it was completely by accident. He was on a walk in a park, Lepuan, close to his office when he saw them. Maya was pushing a baby stroller, and Naomi, who looked to be around 18 months old, was pointing at birds and chattering happily. Maya seemed transformed. She had a new kind of confidence and strength about her, in a way he had never seen when they were together. For a quick second, he thought about walking over to them to say hello. But then he saw that Victor was with them. Victor was walking right next to the stroller. He was laughing at something Naomi had just said in her baby talk. He was completely present in the moment, in a way that Marcus never was. So Marcus just stood where he was, watching them from afar. Naomi had her mother's lovely smile and her grandfather's knowing eyes. She looked healthy, happy, and deeply loved. A strange feeling tightened in Marcus's stomach. It was not exactly jealousy. It was more like a sudden, sharp understanding. He realized he had been given a chance to be part of that life. He could have been the one pushing that stroller, the one hearing his daughter's laughter. He could have built something that had real meaning, but he chose a different way. It was not because Maya was not good enough for him. It was because he told himself that she was too much work. He wanted a life that was easy and simple. Instead, the life he got was one that felt hollow. Isabel was gone. His career had suffered one quiet setback after another. He did not see the full amount of the damage until people just stopped answering his calls. The upgraded life he thought he was choosing felt more empty with every year that went by. In that very same time, Maya had built something that was impossible to overlook. She did not do it with splashy announcements or out of a need for revenge. She did it with quiet and steady hard work. The foundation kept on growing. Her name started to come up in circles that really mattered, like on education committees and the boards of nonprofit organizations. She never looked for the spotlight, but the spotlight eventually found her. People always admire someone who is competent, and she had shown her competence over and over again. Marcus, in contrast, was completely stagnant. His career had stalled. All of his relationships were shallow and had no genuine connection. His life felt more like a show he was putting on for other people, rather than something he was actually living. From time to time, he would consider contacting her. He thought perhaps he could apologize or try to explain his actions. But what could he really say? I am sorry I left you when things became hard. I am sorry I could not see how valuable you were. I am sorry my ego was too big to even ask a single question. None of it would change anything. Maya had moved on from him, completely and for good. He was left all alone with a difficult lesson that he had learned far too late for it to do him any good. The years passed. Naomi started kindergarten, and the foundation celebrated its 5th anniversary. Maya's name finally appeared in a major business publication. The title of the article was, "The Philanthropist You Have Never Heard of." The story talked about her father, the foundation, and all the amazing work it was doing. It mentioned Marcus only one time, almost as an aside. It said, Richardson was previously married, but has been a single mother since her daughter was born. The article continued, choosing to focus on her family and charitable work instead of public relationships. It was just one sentence, and it reduced him to a small part of her past. He read it a second time, and it felt like a sharp punch. It was not because the words were mean, but because they were entirely true. He had been made into a tiny detail, a short chapter in her life story. He was just someone who was there for a little while and then left before anything truly important happened. And the most painful part of it all was knowing he deserved it. Maya stood inside her father's old apartment for the very last time. 6 years had gone by since her father's death. 6 years of building a new life, of growing, and of discovering who she was without anyone else's direction. Naomi was spending the day with Victor, which gave Maya the quiet time she needed to close this last chapter on her own. She walked through the rooms she knew so well, which now felt much smaller than she recalled. She traced her fingers along the kitchen counter where her father had cooked so many meals. She sat on the sofa that had been his bed for 16 years. The apartment was empty now, cleared to make room for a new chapter. Every piece of furniture had found a new place, and his belongings were all packed in boxes. All that remained were the memories and a single envelope she had saved. Victor told her to wait until she was really ready before opening it. Now was the time. She gently broke the seal. The note began, "My dearest daughter, if you are seeing these words, then enough time has passed for you to understand what I need to say. Losing a loved one does not happen to punish you. It happens to give you permission. It gives you the freedom to finally be who you were meant to become. Once there is no one around to direct your life, you are finally free to decide your own path. This is your chance to create a life based on your own values, instead of constantly seeking approval from others. This is your chance to let go of anyone who fails to recognize your value. You should not do this out of spite, but because your focus is on building a wonderful new life. Over these past years, you have proved to the world what I always knew. A person's true nature is not shown by what they own. It is revealed by the choices they make when facing their greatest challenges. Some will claim that you just got lucky, that you were handed your money and your chances in life. Let them believe that. They will never grasp that having riches without good judgment is pointless. And you, my sweet girl, had good judgment long before you ever had money. I am so unbelievably proud of you. It is not about your achievements, it is about your deep and steady kindness. You have always remained grounded, and you have always followed your own moral compass. That is the real legacy I wanted to give you. With all my love, Dad. Maya neatly folded the letter and put it back inside the envelope. She wiped away the few tears that had trickled down her cheeks. With a final click, she locked the apartment and stepped into the warm afternoon light. Her daughter, Naomi Wilmy, was waiting for her with Victor at his office below. The moment Naomi saw her, she ran forward with a happy cry. "Mama!" Maya lifted her little girl into a big, warm embrace, squeezing her gently. "Did you have a good time today?" she asked. "We got ice cream," Naomi announced with a huge smile. "I bet you did," Maya said, glancing over at Victor. He gave a little shrug and a smile. "It is one of the benefits of being a grandpa," he said with a playful wink. The trio began walking toward the car as Naomi chattered away about her adventures. Victor kept asking Naomi funny questions, which made the little girl laugh. While Maya was fastening her daughter's seatbelt, she looked at this amazing little person. Naomi would never know her grandfather, but Maya was determined to raise her with his principles. In that quiet moment, a feeling she had thought was lost for good began to surface. A deep and overwhelming gratitude washed over her. It had nothing to do with the inheritance, but everything to do with the woman she could now be. Her dad was right all along. His passing was not the final chapter. It was the very first page of a new book. This was her chance to create the exact life she wanted, without asking for approval or explaining her choices to anyone. And she knew with complete certainty that she was on the right path. If this story touched your heart and made you reflect on family, strength, or new beginnings, we invite you to subscribe. By doing so, you are choosing stories that enrich your life, not just pass the time. Let us discover these insights as a community. Hello to all of you, and we appreciate you watching until the end. We are so grateful for your viewership. If this story meant something to you, let us know by hitting the like button. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts with us in the comments section. We genuinely enjoy hearing from you. The best part is that your journey with us can continue right now. Just tap on the video that is appearing on your screen to start a new and amazing story. We are sure it is one that you will find unforgettable. Thanks again for being such a great part of our family here. Until the next story, keep your mind open and always search for tales that make you feel something. Our team put a great deal of care into the research, writing, and creation of this piece. Our goal is to bring you powerful stories that offer valuable lessons about life. Each narrative is crafted to give you enjoyment, inspiration, and a sense of strength. We are firm believers that the right story can transform a person's perspective, and we are dedicated to creating material that has a real impact. We are so happy to have you as a valued member of our community.